Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. October is here, which means it's time to begin new seasons in the middle of a couple of others and a conclusion of another, where there'll be lots of scrutiny, attention, and intrigue. I'll have it all for you right here, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with Joe's JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who have been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now, as the stage is set for the first time ever in Major League Baseball wildcard history, we not only have one, not two, three decisive Game 3s on tap for this afternoon, or depending on when you're listening to this, because this will go up right before Game 1, or I should say Game 3, the first of three games in Cleveland, where you have Detroit and Cleveland at 3 p.m., followed by San Diego at Chicago at 5, and then a nightcap, 8 p.m. in the Bronx between the Red Sox and Yankees. And we already have one matchup set up where the Dodgers took care of the Cincinnati Reds in pretty easy fashion. I know the Reds were a little bit feisty there in Game 2 when they were down 8-0, and then they came back to cut it to within 10-5. Actually had the bases loaded there, I believe in the 8th inning, but they fell way short. To me, unless they got the tying run to the plate, and even so, they had the bases loaded and a chance to cut it to 10-9. But was there any doubt that the Dodgers were going to be in any type of jeopardy of them losing that game? Absolutely not. And then even last night, where the Reds, off of a Teoscar Hernandez error in right field, they got 2 runs there on a single by Sal Stewart. But the Dodgers then took over. They ended up winning 8-4, and now they'll have a flight set for Philadelphia, I'm sure, sometime today. And I'll talk about that series in a little bit, because the division series, that's the only one I can really predict. The others I cannot. So let me rewind and go back to what happened the past couple of days before we can look ahead to the division series, or potential of which teams may get there, which teams may not. I'll start off with Detroit and Cleveland, and let me even combine just Tarek Skubal and Garrett Crochet here for a quick second. I'll talk about Red Sox Yankees in a moment, but there is absolutely nothing like having that horse, having that stud, that ace that is going to deliver an epic and dominant performance, as you saw Tarek Skubal did, as well as Garrett Crochet. But for Skubal, 7 2/3, 14 strikeouts, 1 run, 3 hits. He did give up 3 walks. But this is a guy that probably is going to win the Cy Young, and with Crochet, probably a 1A in the American League. That was a performance that you wanted to see, because you rarely get to see a starter go 7 innings, let alone get into the 8th inning to where he's dealing, where he's painting the black at 100. And even with the Tigers, who had stumbled coming into this postseason, granted that they are this close to exacting revenge from the Indians after, or I should say the Guardians, after they overtook the Tigers in the AL Central. And now it comes down to a Game 3, but with Game 1, and knowing that they had to have that game. Anytime Tarek Skubal pitches, save for Crochet in that matter, where those are games that you absolutely positively have to win. And they did so. And fortunately for them, they had to dodge a 9th inning rally where Jose Ramirez hit a ground ball to shortstop, where the Tigers had a 2-1 lead. And there was an error there by Baez where it went past Spencer Torkelson. It hit Ramirez and went up the first base line. And next thing you know, Ramirez was standing on third with nobody out. And Will Vest, who came in at the bottom of the 8th to get the 1 out. And now he had to really sweat it out in order for him to get out of that game alive with a victory, because if they would have lost, obviously the series would have been lost altogether, considering what the Guardians did yesterday. But with the strikeout there at the next batter, and then they had the comebacker to the mound where Ramirez was in no man's land, I understand maybe the shadows played into the effect there between home plate and the pitcher's mound, to where he probably thought the ball was going to bounce over the pitcher's head. Or maybe he thought it was hit harder than it was, so therefore he was caught between third and home in a rundown where he got tagged out. And then the next batter just flew out to or I should say popped up to Baez to end the game. So with game one in hand, and the Tigers have the lead where a lot of the teams that have won game one usually have won the series. Now, as far as yesterday goes, it was tooth and nail. The Tigers had a zillion opportunities to bust the game open. They were unable to do so. They left a small village on base. I had to pull up the box score to see how many men they left on base, but trust me, they had ample opportunities to score runs, and they were unable to do so. And with the game tied at 1 in the bottom of the 8th, you had the big home run there by Brian Rocchio, who then turned that around to get another run in from 2-1 to 3-1, and then Bo Naylor hit a 3-run homer to cap off a 5-run 8th inning, an uprising when you think about it, because the Guardians, they have a very punch and Judy, sacrifice, bunt, station-to-station type baseball, and they do not have a lot of power in that lineup. So for them to have that type of inning, maybe that will be a good sign for them coming into Game 3 today, where maybe they will relax and start to get not only just key hits, but maybe even try to get a timely home run. And the Guardians now have tied the series with Game 3 there at 3 o'clock, as I mentioned. And how I look at that game today, I picked the Tigers to win in 3. I'm going to stick with that because the Tigers, I understand the pitching is very dubious. And same for the Guardians for that matter. It's not as if they're throwing a lights-out starter. And in fact, they're pitching a guy named Slade Ciccone, who I've never seen pitch. And I understand he has ability, but right off the bat, I would think even with Jack Flaherty, a guy that was 8-15 this year, but he knows how to pitch in big games. He did so last year in the World Series, if you remember, Game 1, not necessarily Game 5, as he got lit up there by the Yankees in route to the Dodgers winning a World Series. But for Flaherty, I would actually have to trust him a little bit more. I'm sure they want to try to get at least 5 innings from him. I know in the game yesterday, they pulled Casey Mize there a little bit sooner than you'd like. But the bullpens are going to pretty much be dominant, or I should say dominant. They're pretty much going to be prevalent, I should say, throughout the course of these games, not only just in the Tiger-Guardian game, but you would expect the same for San Diego and Chicago, and most definitely tonight in the Bronx between the Red Sox and Yankees. So I think the Tigers will find a way to prevail. They have a little bit more punch in their offense. You just hope that A.J. Hinch doesn't make a boneheaded move. I know he pulled Riley Green for a pinch hitter there yesterday, which made you scratch your head a little bit. But hopefully they don't push the panic button and not have the analytics just swallow them up to where they try to forecast the game 3 hours before it's actually played, as I've said a million times. And that has been evident, especially in the Yankee series, which I'll touch on in a moment. But you have that game there, so I think the Tigers will eke out a win. They'll find a way to win and then advance, and then we'll go to Seattle to play the Mariners come Saturday, if that's the case. Then in the National League, you have San Diego and Chicago, where Game 1, mind-scratching in a sense where Craig Counsell took out his starter Matthew Boyd, 58 pitches, 4 in the 3rd inning. And I get it that it's a situation where you're going to have these managers look at the game from the iPad as opposed to the eye test in their gut. So with Boyd getting pulled out, and it was already down 1-0 in the game, but they were able to get a couple of strikeouts there by the reliever there. I think Palencia was the one that came in. And then in the bottom of the inning, you got the back-to-back home runs there by Seiya Suzuki and Carson Kelly. And then they tacked on another run there in the 8th inning. Padres didn't really muster up a lot of rallies there in the latter part of the game. And the Cubs were able to take Game 1. And then yesterday, it was the Machado home run, which was to me, was the clincher. The Padres are hanging on to a 1-0 lead that they got early in the game, similar to what you saw there in Game 1. And then, like I mentioned, Machado was the one that got the 2-run homer. He hit deep out of the ballpark, I believe, from what I gather, from when I watched the highlight. And I was watching that back and forth between doing a live stream, although I was done with that at the time, but just trying to edit and do a couple of things. And then while watching Machado hit the home run, and what could you say? The Cub offense was asleep at the wheel, did not really do anything, only had 4 hits in the game. And Machado's home run, which was key, was in the 5th inning, so it was in the middle of the game. They still had plenty of opportunities to try to get back in the game. But between Dylan Cease, who is a guy that I look at, who although has ability and strikes out a lot of guys, but certainly was one that I felt in my mind that he was going to get lit up here. But he did do fairly well. He only pitched 3 2/3 innings. Mike Schilt did not trust him 100%, only got to a certain point of the game, and therefore the rest of the bullpen took over. Mason Miller was dominant. An inning and 2/3, 5 strikeouts, so 5 up, 5 down, all by K. And that was the guy who they got from the A's in the middle of the season, or really right at the trade deadline. So for the Padres, they hang on and win. And I picked the Padres to win this series in 2. I'm going to pick them to win in 3. And with Yu Darvish pitching today, I like that matchup a lot better if you're a Padre fan, because for the Cubs to throw out Jameson Taillon, who I understand has a track record and has ability, but Darvish, to me, in this spot, I would absolutely rely on a lot more. And I thought the Padres would win in 2 only because the Cubs, I felt as if, yes, they do have the home field, and yes, they do have some guys in the lineup that don't really scare you, but guys like Dansby Swanson, Suzuki, who I know hit the home run there on Tuesday. Here it is today, Thursday. Trust me, people, I'm a little bit of a slumber, so I'm playing a little bit injured in that regard. So I appreciate you just sticking with me here. But with that being said, the Cub lineup, although it's not a bunch of gangbusters and world beaters, but I do like their stick-to-itiveness, the Ian Happs of the world, and guys like that. But to me, they're not overwhelmingly dominant like the way Fernando Tatis or even a guy like Manny Machado, they could break games open. So to me, you got to have a couple more guys like that where maybe the lineup for the Cubs is a little bit more steadier but not spectacular like the top-heavy Padres are. So that's why I'm going to pick them to win, as I said, in 2. So I'm going to pick them to win in 3. And then as far as the Red Sox and Yankees go, Garrett Crochet, what could you say about his performance in Game 1? And even on top of all that, Aroldis Chapman in a relief role and what he did. Because for him to have the bases loaded, nobody out in the 9th inning with the Red Sox up 3-1, and for him to get out of that jam as cool, calm, and collected as possible. But to me, the highlight of that game was what Aaron Boone did, and he's a guy that you cannot trust in big spots. Why he pulled Max Fried, and I understand he had some stressful innings there in the 5th and 6th, but to pull him there after getting the first out in the 7th inning to bring in Luke Weaver, and this was the first guess. I said to myself, why are you pulling him at 102 pitches? Let him pitch the rest of the 7th inning, and then unless he gets into big-time trouble. If he gives up a walk and then a hit and it's 1st and 2nd, nobody out, all right, then at that point I could see him pulling Max Fried to bring in the bullpen. But for Weaver to come in there and then he gives up the walk to Ceddanne Rafaela, then the hit, which was stretched to a double there, and which was fantastic by Nate Eason. And then you had a scenario where Yoshida came up, Matsusaka Yoshida had the big hit, which played in 2 runs, and that was it. To know that Weaver came in there, and he has not been the same relief pitcher as last year during their playoff run, or even earlier this year for that matter. I know he has some nagging injuries that he's been dealing with, so he has not had the same effectiveness that he had just earlier this year and a year ago. But between that and then not having Jazz Chisholm start the game, which I didn't really get in on him for that, I got on him later where they pitched to Alex Bregman after Trevor Story gets on base and then he steals second. And then I wanted to pitch to Bregman in that spot. He is a Yankee killer. He's a guy that is a winning player. And what happens? He golfs a pretty good pitch into the left field corner where Story scores. And that was a key insurance run that you got there. But then to think, Chisholm, who didn't start in the game and obviously was bothered by it when you saw in the postgame where he had his back to the media, which obviously that was a bad job by him. But Chisholm did get a chance to redeem himself in the 9th inning off of Chapman, but he hit a lazy fly ball to right, which was unable to get Goldschmidt to score. And you could have even argued 9th inning, you could have pinch run for Goldschmidt, but they didn't do so. And there it was, the Red Sox steal Game 1 behind Crochet's brilliance. His only blemish was the home run that he gave up to Anthony Volpe. And now the Yankees are in a do-or-die game last night where they get off to a 2-0 lead. And a lot of the reason why you didn't see Garrett Whitlock in the game on Tuesday night was because they didn't want Ben Rice to have an opportunity to wreck the game, which he did so in the early portion. There hitting the 2-run homer in the 1st inning off of Brian Bayo. And then the Red Sox answered back with the 2-run single by Trevor Story. Then Bale gets pulled early, I guess from the standpoint of knowing that this was going to be a quote-unquote bullpen game for Alex Cora. And he was masterful to the point where the Yankees took the lead there 3-2 on a misplayed fly ball by Duran, which to me, that should have been an error. I don't know why they gave him a single and an RBI. That was a joke. Terrible scoring by the official scorer in my eyes. But then Story hits the home run to tie the game, which I thought Rodon, and then first and second after that. Rodon, listen, he stabilized the game and he gave you innings, but you would think you got to make that stick there, and he was unable to do so. So not to say he had a bad start, but he certainly had a bad ending for him. And then first and second with nobody out, they were able to get out of that jam. They had bases loaded, and Trevor Story came up with a ball that I thought was going to be gone off the bat, but it was caught there in center by Grisham. And then Fernando Cruz, I don't understand. He ended up like looking like Hulk Hogan, Hulkamania, pretty much almost ripping his shirt off. Obviously, he didn't do that, but I get it. He was emotional. He was certainly caught up in the moment. But geez, you would have thought that he got out of the bases loaded jam and he had everybody at 3-0 before he struck out the side where the histrionics and just the extracurricular nonsense. But anyway, all right, fine. He was able to get out of that. And then here comes the 7th inning where the Red Sox had another opportunity to score a run. And what happened? Oh, excuse me, in the 8th inning where they had a chance. Oh, wait, let me take that back. 7th inning, I got my innings all mixed up. In that 7th inning when Story hit the grand slam, the key play of that inning was Jazz Chisholm being able to stab that ball by Yoshida yet again, Johnny on the spot, where the runner Eaton on third should have gone home on that play because it was 2 outs, and as the ball was hit on the ground, although he rounded third and was halted by the third base coach, to me, the instinct should have kicked in that the moment that that ball hit the dirt, I understand he could have been scooped there by Rice, but even if it was scooped, it's a situation where Rice is off balance. There's no way he's going to get a throw off. And if he did, it would have to be an exact perfect throw in order to get Eaton out at the plate. But I understand. He's got to go by what the third base umpire chose him to do at that point. And even though the first base umpire or first base coach, you could see him, he was motioning to third base to have Eaton come in to score, but that wasn't to be the case. And then that led to Story's deep fly ball. And of course, Fernando Cruz going just bonkers there on the field after getting that last out. So then now let's get to the bottom of the 8th where you had Garrett Whitlock come in for the first time and pitching in his 2nd inning, I might add. But he gets the 2 outs. He ends up walking Jazz Chisholm. And then on a 3-2 pitch where Austin Wells hits a ball into the corner, Jazz Chisholm, who was running with the pitch, scores from right field. Bang, bang play, but he was certainly in before the tag was made. And then the 9th inning had a little bit of a scare. You get the 2 outs there from David Bednar, but then Ceddanne Rafaela hits a ball deep to right field, which off the bat I thought it was gone. Because as you know, right field is an absolute joke in Yankee Stadium. I can hit a ball out of Yankee Stadium. I'm sure anybody that has any skills to hit a baseball could hit a ball out in right field. And when the ball was in the air, I thought it was gone. But of course, it died at the warning track. Aaron Judge, pump fist, and now we have a Game 3 tonight. And I did pick the Red Sox to win in 3 games, but I trust Alex Cora more than I trust Aaron Boone in this spot. Cam Schlittler, he's a rookie. He's going to go up against this Red Sox lineup. Well, let's face it, this Red Sox lineup is bereft of a bona fide power hitter. And I understand you could say, well, they traded him to San Francisco during the year, but you could actually look at that trade as maybe the turnaround of this team this year to get to the postseason and to get to where they are today. But other than Story and Alex Bregman, there's not a guy in the lineup that I'd be shaking in my boots. And yes, I understand you got Duran who has some ability, but he's obviously a very streaky offensive player. Rafaela can have his moments. Nate Eason, nobody knows if he even fell on you. Yoshida, who right now is a bench player. And who knows, maybe Yoshida may get a crack here. But again, he missed a lot of the season there with an injury. So they're going to have to scratch, claw, do what they can to try to sacrifice runners over. As you saw Rafaela try to do that in that 7th inning where he bunted right back to Cruz. And the Yankees, as you all know, they're a bully offense. They can hit home runs left and right. And last night notwithstanding, although you got the home run from Rice, but here's a situation where this game favors the Yankees in my eyes because who the Red Sox are going to pitch in this game tonight is a rookie, Conley Early. I mean, do you really expect them to go at least 5 innings? Absolutely not. I'm sure at the first sign of trouble, he's going to have to get pulled and it's going to be another bullpen game. Although it may be a situation where he's going to have to give him at least 3, and I'm sure that's what they're going to hope for tonight because the last thing they want to do is just go through their bullpen again. You would think Garrett Whitlock is not going to be available considering he threw, 48 pitches yesterday. So that's what you have there. And I think the Yankees, although I picked the Red Sox in 3, and I guess I got to stick with that. But if you're going to go with my gut, I think the Yankees are going to prevail and move on to play the Toronto Blue Jays come this Saturday. Now, let's talk about the storylines here because now you're going to introduce the teams that had the byes. And I can't give you any predictions with the other 3 series. I can't give you a prediction with Dodgers, Phillies. I think the Dodgers, listen, I'm sure they've heard it from the national media who cover baseball that this team was in a slumber, their bullpen is garbage, which it still is. But their rotation now is going to be intact. Shohei Ohtani is going to pitch game 1. So you have that to think about. And it's going to be interesting whether or not the Phillies with the layoff here and obviously trying to bounce back from a division series loss last year to the Mets. And what does that have to do with this year? Absolutely nothing. But I'm sure in the back of their minds, they're thinking like, we cannot lose in this round again because of what happened there in that round a year ago this time. But something tells me the Dodgers, they're hitting, and the red pitching, I understand last night, I don't know why they didn't pitch a guy like Andrew Abbott, who would have been on his regular rest. Why they saved him is beyond me. But for the Dodgers, I really truly think that this series is going to be theirs to lose. That's not a knock on the Phillies. I understand they have good starting pitching as well. No Zach Wheeler, as you know. But I think the Dodgers are going to win this series in 4 games. I just think that they have a couple of games under their belt, maybe a little bit of rust on the Phillies' end. This is the matchup that I'm sure the Phillies did not want now. They probably wanted them more in a situation where it was a championship series setting. And mind you, they just played each other 3 weeks ago in Chavez Ravine where the Phillies won 2 out of 3 and they actually won the first 2 games of that series. But now this is postseason, whole different ballgame. And I could see the Dodgers winning 1 of 2 in Philly before going back to LA. And you mean to tell me that if they do handle business in Philly where they get a split, that the last thing they want to do is get on a plane and come back to Philadelphia for a game 5? I don't think so. And I think the Dodgers right now, they're feeling good about themselves. I understand Philly, they have a lineup that could stack against the best of them. But the Dodgers are very patient in their lineup. They're not going to swing at balls that are out of the zone. And they're very disciplined in the plate in that regard. And they have guys that could nibble, could try to work themselves around the plate, the Ranger Suarez's of the world. And obviously we don't have the early rotation there for the Phillies as far as what they're going to do. And don't have the time frames for these games that are going to start Saturday. You're going to have the 4-game Saturday. And then the National League will have off on Sunday where the 2 American League series will play on Sunday. Then you have the National League Monday, American League Tuesday, and then you have all 4 series there on Wednesday. So that's what the schedule is going to look like, but with the teams and how it's going to unfold, that we'll have to wait and see. But I like the Dodgers in this series, and I'm not saying that as an anti-Philly, considering I'm a Met fan. I just think the Dodgers, based on what Dave Roberts said, they're hungry, they're ready, they've been waiting for this moment, and they certainly showed that there by scoring 18 runs in the 2 games against good pitching. Because that's the strength of the Cincinnati Reds. Obviously, you didn't see that here in the 2 games that we just witnessed. But I like the Dodgers here, and I think they're going to advance to a championship series. As far as the other 3 series, obviously, I can't really predict. So you're going to have to keep yourself dialed on the YouTube channel, at JAYREELZ, to get my predictions. I'll talk a little bit more about the series in earnest tomorrow, and maybe even later this afternoon into the evening, especially when it comes to Tigers, Guardians, and even Cubs and Padres, Yankees. Unless it's a classic, I'll talk about it tonight. If not, I'll talk about it tomorrow, and I'll give you my predictions of those series as we get to the weekend. But as far as the storylines go, before I move on to other things, I think the two big storylines coming out of this, A, is the rust for teams that, let's face it, they don't really know their way around postseason baseball. And even though Toronto's been in the postseason in the last few years, and same for Seattle and Milwaukee as well, but they've generally been wildcard teams. They have not been a team that has had the 5-day layoff. So the first thing I'm going to think of is, what have they done throughout the course of this layoff that is going to get them automatically ready, set, go? And I get it, they're professionals. So if they're not going to be ready for game one or for division series upcoming, then they're in the wrong field of business. I get that. But when teams have already gotten a few games under their belt and some momentum, and you would think that game one could possibly favor the teams that have already played. So for instance, in this case with the Dodgers. So that is going to be one thing that I'm going to look at here, as far as maybe the Phillies not so much because they know their way around postseason baseball more so than the aforementioned other three teams. But that's why I'm going to highlight Seattle, Toronto, and Milwaukee, because this is uncharted territory for them. And that's not to say they're going to lose the series, but is it going to be a situation where we saw 2 years ago where the Dodgers, Orioles, and Atlanta Braves in a division series after having the bye, they split the bit. They were pretty much a no-show. Between the three teams, they won one game. That's right. The only team that won was Atlanta against Philly because the Dodgers and the Baltimore Orioles got swept out of the postseason in that round. So that's the first storyline I'm going to look at when it comes to the AL and NLDSs. Now, again, we don't know what's going to happen here. What teams are going to match up against one another. That we'll have to wait and see. But to me, the other storyline that I'm looking at here, how good are the Milwaukee Brewers? This was a team that pretty much led from in front right around the All-Star break. They had that stretch where they were, 48-17 after starting off 27-28, and then they cooled off, which was expected. And yeah, I could talk about the Mariners too because they've been on a hot stretch as well. But I want to focus in on the Brewers because the Brewers are a team that, to me, is built more for the regular season. They're almost like the Rays have been in years where they won 100 games and they won a division. Just think of 2021. I understand they went to the World Series the year before, but that was during the pandemic year. But in 2021, they won 100 games, they won a division, had the bye, and they lost to the Red Sox in the division series. Are the Brewers going to be in that mold, or are they going to be a team that, all right, they're not going to be an offensive juggernaut because they don't have that one or even two guys that can wreck the game? Christian Yelich is not in 2017, 2018, 2019 mode anymore. Is he a dangerous offensive player? Yes, he is. But he is not a guy that is of the ilk of Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber. And you're going down the list of the teams in the National League. So for the Brewers, is this team going to step up and get to not only just a championship series, but are they going to be a team that's going to be, the Brewers, they look like they're for real and they've come to play? Or is it going to be a scenario where they lose game one and then maybe they win game two and then they have to go on the road to, let's say, Chicago or even San Diego for that matter, and then the next thing you know, they're down 2-1? Now, could they be the team that could rise and win in 5 games? Of course. You got to give them at least that dap, but they haven't had any pressure on them since the middle of the year. So let's see whether or not this team is going to be for real. And that's what I'm going to look at when I look at this Brewer team, whether or not this team is legitimate. Yes, over the course of 162, we have seen that. But now we're into October. The deep end of the pool is here. Let's see if the Brewers will rise to the occasion. And to a lesser degree, the Mariners for that regard, and I'll leave it there. Because Toronto, listen, they have good pitching. Who knows about Bo Bichette? I would think that he may be ready to play. Remember, he had missed a lot of time here over the last month of the season. I believe he had a hamstring issue, so that will be a huge loss if he's not going to be in the lineup come Saturday against the Yankees or the Red Sox. But to me, Seattle, with the way that they've played here over the last couple of weeks of the year, I'm sure the Pacific Northwest, they're going to be waiting for game one, having the home field. Now, Toronto has home field throughout because they had the better record. But I'm sure there's going to be a buzz there come Saturday, whether it's the Tigers or Guardians, knowing that they have a very good shot, and they're going to be a heavy favorite because the Tigers, you're not going to see Skubal until Sunday when they play because he's not going to pitch on 3 days rest. So they have a good opportunity to go up 1-0 in that best-of-5 series before Skubal toes the rubber there on Sunday. So it's all in front of Seattle as well. So that will be the storylines from me. And maybe I'll unpack a few more storylines once the matchups are set and we could go ahead and break that down on the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. So you definitely want to stay tuned to that as we get past the wild card round and into the division series. Now, let me get to a couple other things before I move it along. You have a lot of managers that were let go, and this was after the recording on Monday. So you have Rocco Baldelli out in Minnesota, Bob Melvin out in San Francisco. Was only there for 2 years, and I guess because of the payroll and the expectations, fell way short of their goal of making the postseason, so he was gone. Bruce Bochy out in Texas, mutually parting the ways. He only signed a 3-year deal, so that was it. There were rumors about maybe Bochy resurfacing in San Francisco because of the connection with the Giants and with the vice president of baseball operations, Buster Posey, his former player who won championships for Bochy. But that was shot down. They said, we're not going to revisit that. So Bochy, no chance that he's going to get the job there in San Francisco. Ron Washington won't return in LA. Remember, he had that, I believe, a quadruple bypass. And even though he may be healthy for the start of next season, but he is in his early 70s. And I don't know if it's probably smart for him to travel and do all those things as he's on the mend. So the Angels are going to look for a manager. And the rumor has it that the Angels could be looking to interview Albert Pujols. Now you think about that. Now remember, Albert Pujols is going to be on the bench as, I believe, a 1A to Nelson Cruz for the Dominican Republic team for the World Baseball Classic, which will be in March of next year. So does this mean that maybe Pujols, knowing that he has that connection with Cruz and that he is a bench coach, that he wants to dabble in managing? That we'll have to wait and see. But Pujols, a manager, I'm not surprised. And then Brian Snitker, same for him in Atlanta as they look. And Snitker is what, I believe 68, 69 years of age. So it was time for him to part ways, and I'm sure that was mutual. They're going to have a ceremony of him being in the Ring of Honor next year in Atlanta. So this wasn't a firing. This was just one that it was just time. So let's see where the Braves go for a manager. And I wouldn't be surprised. Skip Schumacher's a guy that's out there. And I'm not trying to make him out to be Tony La Russa, but he had good success there in Miami, took his team to the playoffs there, 2 years ago, but then was unceremoniously fired last year. So therefore, maybe Schumacher's a guy that could resurface in one of these spots, and maybe Atlanta. That would be a typical spot for him to go to, and then next thing you know, Atlanta will be back where they belong, near the top of the National League. Who knows, starting next year and beyond. That's not a prediction. That's just an observation here, knowing that he's a guy out there, a very smart baseball mind, and obviously took the Marlins 2 years ago to a postseason, although they got spanked by the Phillies there, if you recall. All right, now let me turn my attention to the NFL as we now look forward to a Week 5 as I put on the helmet and shoulder pads. And before I get to Shedeur Sanders, I'm not going to talk about him right now, and I know that that was some of the bullet point or some of the talk shows out there, which I'm going to get on their case in a moment. But for Week 5, very light schedule. Not a lot cooking. I know you got a lot of injuries and even retirements that I'll get into, and even some controversy surrounding A.J. Brown. No shock there. But the schedule tonight has a great game with the Niners going to L.A. to play the Rams. An early season NFC West showdown. The Rams playing well this year. Actually could be 4-0. Remember, they had that 26-7 lead in Philadelphia and had a chance to win the game, where they could have sealed it with a field goal, but it got blocked and returned the other way, if you recall. But the Niners, where Brock Purdy re-injured himself, I don't know what his status is for the game tomorrow night, but tonight, for that, it's tonight the game, not tomorrow night. So I would think the Rams, I don't know what the spread is, but I would look at them as to try to get a leg up, knowing that they want to win that game in their building before having to go to San Francisco later on in the year. And I'm sure a lot of the Niner fans are going to flock to SoFi to cheer their team on and see if they could get the upper hand in the division. Of course, not only in the standings, but also with the tiebreaker scenario. So that should be a very good game. And as you know, the Thursday night games are I don't want to go as far as saying atrocious, but they're not really that good. And people can say, well, JAYREELZ, last year you had another NFC West battle between the Seahawks and Cardinals, but that was an awful game. The Seahawks were up 17-3 and 20-6 pretty much almost at the halfway point of the fourth quarter until the Cardinals came roaring back to tie the game in the closing minutes, and then they kicked the game-winning field goal there, Jason Myers, and that was it. So the ending was good, but the game itself was bad because a lot of these Thursday night games are not one to write home about. Now, we look forward to them because it's a Thursday, sets yourself up right before the weekend, something to watch, etc. But, I mean, these games are usually not great. So hopefully tonight they'll change that tune and you'll get a situation to where it will come down to the wire, it'll be tooth and nail, back and forth, and you'll get a good outcome there, whether for the Niners or for the Rams. So we'll see about that. Now, I'm going to be all over the Yankee-Red Sox game, so please, I may tune in from time to time, but I'm not going to be dialed in to a Week 5 Thursday night game when you have a decisive Game 3 in the wild card round. That's just yours truly. But the rest of the schedule this week, where you have the first set of byes for the first time this year, Atlanta, Chicago, Green Bay, and yes, Pittsburgh. So they're going to take their bye now, and I guess it comes at a good time for them, only because they have a lot of personnel that's hurt, the Joey Porters and guys like that who have been out and are looking to try to get back on the field. So maybe this does come at a good time, considering that now it's going to be a sprint for the most part just to get to the end of the year, and hopefully there'll be one of the 7 teams standing in the AFC to clinch a playoff spot. And Green Bay, another good team that's going to be out here. Atlanta, Chicago, all right, whatever. But the games this week there's one good game if you ask me. Maybe 1.5. Minnesota at Cleveland. As you know, the scenario where Minnesota has stayed overseas, they played in Ireland last week and now will be playing in London for another international game. And Cleveland, who benched Joe Flacco, and I guess I'll unpack this now, where Dillon Gabriel is going to be your starter. What did I see on First Take yesterday? Because I was curious. I was hoping that they would start with the baseball, considering that the Yankees lost, and with Aaron Boone, again, blowing another game, or I wouldn't say he blew the game, but another boneheaded decision by him, that maybe, just maybe, they would have started with the baseball. No. What is the graphic that I see at the bottom of the screen? When will Shedeur Sanders start in Cleveland? And I said to myself, you got to be kidding. Why are the Cleveland Browns of anybody's focus? And I understand the last name Sanders, but come on. If Dillon Gabriel is starting, I don't want to hear a debate. Oh, well, Shedeur should get the start. No. The depth chart was Joe Flacco, Dillon Gabriel, and Shedeur Sanders. Why is this a story? Why? And again, because Shedeur Sanders and what happened at the draft, he should have been a first-round pick. We get all that, but please, that is the biggest non-story going. And I'm going to shout him out. If First Take and if Stephen A., if that was in the production meeting, we have to start with this, just to appease the young demographic, just to appease the NFL fan, and I don't want to hear how much, Stephen A., he could brag, boast, puff out his chest about how they're number one in that time slot, number one in the ratings, so on and so forth. Well, they're number one in the ratings for the sports talk, sports debates, and just for dummies programming. Because that's not for true sports fans. That's not for the kook like myself. That's not for the kook and kooks that I know who go to watch sports. Because that, to me, is lazy sports talk. That, to me, is beyond obvious sports talk. That, to me, is not even sports talk. Yes, it is sports talk. I mean, of course, I have to admit that it is. But who the hell cares? The baseball should be front and center. And I don't care who the demographic. I don't care if they shut the TV off. This is October. This is baseball. This is what it's all about. And I get it that baseball's not part of it. I'm spitting over here. Baseball's not part of a lot of people's consciousness. But I'm starting with the baseball. And for those that don't like it, they can fast forward to the NFL. But anyway, Shedeur Sanders, the watch. He's not on my watch. And yes, you may see that in my title, in my graphic, when it comes to what I'm talking about here on the podcast. But if you're going to think that, I think in week 10, you're going to see Shedeur Sanders. Or, Dillon Gabriel. Nonsense. If Dillon Gabriel does not play well, and when Shedeur Sanders is going to be now inserted and under center for whenever week that's going to be, then we'll talk about it. But right now, one more time, non-story, find it elsewhere. Because to me, please, you got to find something else better to do if Shedeur Sanders is going to be at the top of the food chain when it comes to sports talk on Thursday, October 2nd. Not this guy. Las Vegas and Indianapolis, oof. Giants at New Orleans, yeah. Dallas at the Jets, Denver at Philadelphia. Very good game. Good litmus test for Denver. If they play competitive and lose a close game, that's a good sign. If they lose 38-10, not so good, especially with that defense. And let's see how Bo Nix does against that Eagle team that's 4-0. And I know A.J. Brown was a story there. He came out with a quote because he's not getting a lot of catches, a lot of targets, and here they are winning. But a lot of people thought what he said was him trying to get out of Philadelphia. Where Nick Sirianni reinforced that's not the case, and even A.J. Brown said, no, that what I said was not targeted toward Jalen Hurts or the Eagles. And to me, I don't want to say it's a non-story, but it's a situation where A.J. Brown came out and said some things where, oh, well, if I'm not going to be targeted or whatever, then you know what? I just got to put my head down and grind and maybe something else. And I'm paraphrasing, of course. Maybe another situation will arise, blah, blah, blah. So, of course, it's going to get taken out of context. Of course, you're going to read between the lines and think that, does A.J. Brown want out of Philadelphia? And obviously that was squashed, and that's not the case. Miami at Carolina, no thanks. Houston at Baltimore, no Lamar Jackson, and you may not see Lamar Jackson for 3 weeks. Now, that's a story, but I'm not going to unpack that because who knows? I'm sure he is working out feverishly to try to get himself back on the mend. But I believe this week it's Cooper Rush under center, not Lamar Jackson. And that bodes well for Houston because if they want to get back in that race in the AFC South with the Colts and even Jacksonville, that's a game that they have to have. And they've already lost to Jacksonville, as you know. They have not played the Colts yet. Off the top of my head, no, they have not. So that could be a big step for them, although it's going to be with an asterisk with no Lamar because usually Baltimore kills the Texans in matchup head-to-head. Tennessee at Arizona? Nope. Tampa at Seattle? That is your half game. Now, I take that back. 2 good games. Denver, Philly, Tampa, Seattle. I got to give Seattle a little bit more credit. They played well here in the early start, and they're going to know who won on the game tonight. So I'm sure they're probably hoping for the Rams to win because if they win, then they'll have a better record than the Niners because they lose the tiebreaker to the Niners after their week 1 loss. So, and that's a good game. And although Tampa lost to Philly there on Sunday, they got to fly all the way to the Pacific Northwest. And that's going to be a challenge, too, because that game, this is automatic. With the Mariners playing Sunday, I would think that game is going to be an 8 o'clock game. And as it is, I think Tampa-Seattle was originally a 4:25 game. They had to move it up to 4:05 because the stadiums are literally right across the street from one another. So by the time that game's over, you're going to have just a throng of people trying to get into T-Mobile Park where the Mariners play. And with the fans coming out of is it Lumen Field now? Whatever, the Quest Field. It was 100 names ago. They're going to be coming out. That's going to be just a ginormous cluster of people milling around both of those stadiums. But that's going to be a good game. So I said 1.5. I take that back. You have 2 good games. Detroit and Cincinnati would have been good, but with no Burrow, no bueno. Washington at LA to play the Chargers, that is a good game because Jaden Daniels will return under center. How effective will be, that remains to be seen, but that's a good game. And then the Sunday night game I hate, New England at Buffalo, really? And I understand they're trying to give New England at least some early shine. I understand they're 2-2, but that is not a good game. And then you have Kansas City at Jacksonville. All right, that's a good game, but that's a Monday night game. That's when all the games are done for Sunday. Decent game. To me, that's more on Jacksonville than Kansas City because the game is at home. If you want to take Jacksonville seriously, they got to win that game. And let's see how that plays out. Obviously, we have to get to Monday in order to be able to watch that. And my knockout pool pick for the week, and I'm taking it safe. Last week I was cute with Houston, considering that Tennessee rookie quarterback, etc. But now I don't like the games this week. For a second, a split second, I actually thought about taking Arizona because they're playing Tennessee, but I don't want to beat up on Tennessee again. So therefore, I'm going to take, and Arizona's hurt at running back. Trey Benson out 4 to 6 weeks, and also James Conner. So I don't know what they're going to do for a running game. So I'm picking Buffalo this week over New England. That is my knockout pool pick for this week. And as far as anything else going on, I know Nnamdi Madubuike on IR with a neck injury as the Ravens. I know Ronnie Stanley, they suffered a lot of injuries in that game the other day against Kansas City. So who knows how they're going to hold up against the Texans and moving forward for that matter. And then Darius Leonard, a.k.a. Shaq Leonard, retired with Indianapolis, had a great rookie year, looked like he was going to be on to a great career as a linebacker, middle linebacker at that. But back injuries derailed pretty much not only a perennial Pro Bowl, but he's also been an All-Pro as well. Just a terrible situation there when the body's not going to respond, and especially with the back, that is not going to help out anyone's matters, especially when you play a physical sport like football. So all the best to Shaq Leonard moving forward in the next chapter of his career. I'm sure he's probably going to have a job in football where he's going to coach or who knows what, but all the best to him moving forward. And as far as college football, you only have 2 good games this week. Vandy at Alabama, which to me, let's see what Vanderbilt's going to do. They're now ranked 16th, and they played well. They beat South Carolina in South Carolina. They beat them 31-7, but now they're going to really get into the teeth of their schedule because they're going to play Missouri. They're going to play, this 5-game stretch is just brutal. And obviously in the SEC, there are no cupcakes. So they had to go Missouri and I believe LSU before going to Georgia. And there's another team there, I think at Texas as well. I don't know if they play Georgia, but I know Missouri, LSU, at Texas. That 5th game, it may be at Georgia. Did Georgia play at Vanderbilt last year? I think they did. But anyway, this is a litmus test for them. So let's see if they're going to hang with Alabama, who's feeling great after beating Georgia there, as you know, last Saturday night. And then the other game, for nostalgic sake, is Miami at Florida State. Now, could Florida State pull off an upset? I think they could, but I think Miami's going to have enough gas in the tank to try to get out of Tallahassee with a win. Those are the only 2 games to note. So I'm not going to get geeked up on any other games that are happening. You know, Wisconsin, Michigan. No, I'm not going to get all pumped up now. Who knows? You may get an upset special along the way, but as far as marquee matchups with teams that are ranked, those are the 2 games that I'm going to look at here for college football in a week number 6. And as far as the rankings right now, of course, it's Ohio State, Oregon, Miami. Ole Miss moves up to 4 with their win. Oklahoma, that rounds out your top 5, followed by Texas A&M, Penn State, Indiana, Texas, and Alabama. That's your top 10. Then Texas, Georgia, LSU, Iowa State, Tennessee. That's your top 15. Remember, you got to include those teams in there because with the top 12, with the college football playoff, once we get to November, then we'll have a real good understanding because you're getting close to the halfway point of the college season, but there's still plenty to go and obviously a lot of schedule to sink your teeth into. And with conference play now going to really start ratcheting it up, we'll get a better feel and understanding once we get into November. And that's what I'm going to look at here. I know next week you have a big game there with Oregon and Indiana, and that's the one that I'm going to look at to see, talk about a litmus test. And I believe Indiana's going to Oregon. Should I take a look at that? No, we'll wait till next week to take a peek. But that's what you have there with the college football. Quickly, I'm going to go to the NHL because the season, as I lace up the skates, season starts in 5 days. I'll have a preview. I don't know if I'm going to do a separate preview or I'll include it in Monday's podcast. That remains to be seen. Keep your eyes peeled and ears open for the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ to see whether or not I'm going to do that for the hockey fan. But you had a couple of signings. You had Luke Hughes, who with his brother Jack, he could actually brag he's making more money than Jack right now, which you could say he was the former number 1 pick overall. But Luke Hughes, the defenseman, again, brother Jack, 7 years, $63 million, $1 million more than Jack and what he makes there in Jersey. So you're going to keep that tandem there, obviously, for years to come. Nico Mikkola, 8 years, $40 million, the defenseman there down in Florida. And we know with no Alexander Barkov for the whole year with that knee injury he suffered in practice And, of course, Matthew Tkachuk not coming back to December. They had to have some sort of, and they've been giving out big-time contracts this offseason. Aaron Ekblad, also Brad Marchand, and I guess they have a lot of money under the cap, so good for them. So the big deal here that I want to get into is Kirill Kaprizov, the sniper of the Minnesota Wild, who turned down a contract a couple of weeks ago, 8 years, $128 million, which would have been the richest contract in NHL history. But the Wild, with the GM Billy Guerin, the former player, he said, here's $8 million more. So now he's the highest paid player in the sport. Mind you, he's one of the handful of snipers, not playmakers, snipers in the sport. Leon Draisaitl, Nathan MacKinnon. I know he's a playmaker, but he's more of a sniper too. Kirill Kaprizov. Those are guys that, and I understand he's late in his career, Alexander Ovechkin. But here's the thing. I understand they had to sign Kaprizov because now he's the face of the franchise, has been so for many years. But what have the Minnesota Wild done during his time there? What have they been, one and done? I think 1 year they made it to a conference final. Let me think quickly. Were they in a conference final against Vegas? No, they were not. No, they may have been when Vegas went to the Cup final the first time around. Now, I'm going way back. But this is usually a team that is one and done. And maybe they make it to a conference final or a conference semis. Off the top of my head, I got to look into that. My apologies for not knowing that off the top of the dome. But I would think if you're the Wild and the GM, and I understand you gave a lot of money to a player that I understand you had to keep. You couldn't let him go and let him walk for nothing. But you got to surround yourself with that team with better talent. Because if you're going to bring in Kaprizov to be the fabric of your team, they cannot be one and done. Or, okay, win a round and they get ousted in a conference semis in 5 games. You got to put more players around. And I don't know their salary cap situation. I don't know what their financial and fiscal situation is. But, yeah, you may have your guy. But you got to complement him with other guys. Don't you think? So that's number one. And that's not a knock on Kaprizov. That's not a knock on a contract. But it's the team concept. Because if you're not going to complement him with other players that you know can be championship level, then you're going to have a guy that's going to score 40, 50 goals in his sleep. But that is it. Austin Matthews is another sniper. How could I forget him? How are you going to have a guy that's going to be easily a 40 or 50 goal scorer, but they do nothing in the playoffs? Am I wrong for that? So that's number one. But number two, and even bigger, the Edmonton Oilers and their front office. You know right now they're thinking, oh, geez, they gave Kaprizov that money. We're going to have to really back up the truck. And rightfully so. It is Connor McDavid. But we all know McDavid going into the walk year, is he going to re-up with Edmonton, especially if Edmonton doesn't go back to a Stanley Cup final, which they've done the last 2 years. Something to keep in mind, and I've talked about this going back to July. So this isn't news. And you know, one of the storylines going into this season, that's going to be one of the big ones. So just to tip your hand there, or my hand, to see what's coming down the pipe when we go through an NHL preview as far as top storylines, that one off the ice is probably going to be bigger than anything that's on the ice. So keep that in mind as we move it along. All right, I want to get to, let me see what I got left here. Basketball. Both WNBA and NBA as I conclude here with that. I'm going to start off with the WNBA for this reason only. 2 reasons. You have your final set, Phoenix and Las Vegas. And for the Aces, I'm sure they're going to be solid, if not a substantial favorite to win the championship. Remember, prior to the last year where the Liberty won, they won back-to-back titles prior to that. And with A'ja Wilson, the MVP, I would think they would have to be the front runners to win the title this year. Now, mind you, Phoenix, who beat Minnesota in the previous round, and it's been a good WNBA final. I got to admit, you've had upsets. You had series that went the distance. You had Indiana, who pushed Phoenix to the brink there. And even though I know you had the tough injury there with Kelsey Mitchell there in the third quarter of a game that was still kind of hanging in the balance, but Phoenix was able to persevere and win 107-98 in Game 5 after being down 2-1. And, of course, no Caitlin Clark, as I mentioned. And who knows what that would have been if Caitlin Clark was healthy. That would have been, who knows, ratings bonanza. Could you imagine Indiana and Vegas for a title? I'm sure they would have gotten ratings through the roof. I don't know if they're going to do that now, even though Vegas with A'ja Wilson and her star power, is that going to be enough to draw anywhere between 2 to 3 million to watch these games, which game 1 starts tomorrow night, I believe, in Vegas. Vegas did have a better record than Phoenix. But now, here's the bigger thing with the WNBA. I'm sure you saw the comments. Maybe you didn't, because I'm sure WNBA is not on a lot of people's radar. But you had the WNBA vice president and runner-up to the MVP, A'ja Wilson, this year, and a one, Napheesa Collier. And Collier, who was part of that controversial ending, which to me there was no controversy, where in Game 3 of the Phoenix-Minnesota series, where I believe it was Alyssa Thomas stole the ball from Collier, and that was a clean steal. But because she leaned in, stole the ball, and impeded the path of Collier to where she turned her ankle, fell to the floor, and did not play. I believe she did not play in Game 4, where they eventually lost in that series. And wait, let me make sure I got that correctly. Yes, that was in Game 4. And you know, Cheryl Reeve, the head coach, went bonkers. She got ejected and also was suspended for Game 4 because of comments directed toward the officials. So 2 days ago, Collier met the media and came out against the commissioner, Cathy Engelbert, saying that the league has a bunch of players, and not only that, of the protection of its players, to where she said to the commissioner, ready for this? I'm trying to pull up the quote here, that this is the worst leadership in sports based on conversations that she's had with the commissioner, where the commissioner said that you should bow down to the rights deal that we procured, and which was a very rich one in that regard. And I forgot what it was off the top of my head, but they got a decades-long media rights deal. And not only that, but the increase of viewership and even the increase of men attending these games, watching these games, that it's actually more than 50% than the women watch, from what I read recently. But she lambasted the commissioner. Just saying that she has the worst leadership in sports is all you need to know. But there were other things where talking about getting more pay and talking about different streams of revenue for its players. And you've heard Angel Reese come out in response to that, saying that I make more in endorsement deals than I make in my annual salary. And bringing that to the attention of the commissioner, to where the commissioner thumbed their nose toward the players and had the type of comments where it's like, you should be thankful, you should be grateful, you should be lucky that Caitlin Clark is getting the recognition, and Angel Reese and players like that have heightened the awareness of the league to where the average fan are now watching. And that makes me think, if Engelbert was called out on the carpet, is this a situation where she's on the hot seat? And listen, if those conversations were private and were made public now by Collier, I guess you could say that was not cool, but she is the vice president of the league. She's not the 12th woman on the team. She's not a backup center. She's not the first point guard coming off the bench. She's a vice president and an MVP runner-up. So if there's anybody that has any right to say that, it's her. But then you could say, well, JAYREELZ, is this a situation where Anthony Edwards is going to come out against Adam Silver, or Aaron Judge is going to come out against Rob Manfred, the commissioner of baseball, or Josh Allen against Roger Goodell? No, but you got to also think, those leagues are already set. Those collective bargaining agreements between the players and the owners are already written in stone, and they're mutual. Now, the WNBA, the player union, I couldn't even tell you who it is. My apologies there. and the commissioner, whatever was worked out between them two, the players also had to agree to that. So that's not a thing where the head of the players union was screwing over the players themselves to where they got a terrible deal. Now, I don't know. This media rights deal is great, but I don't know what percentage of the pie are the players getting. So maybe Collier's looking at that like, wait a minute. Can we renegotiate here? Like, what's going on? And therefore, with some of the comments that Engelbert said, maybe she will be on the hot seat. Now, the owners, they would have to come to an agreement in order for them to just jettison her. But the reason why I bring this up is because it's twofold. One, is she on the hot seat? And this is something that we haven't seen in the other sports. Now, I don't know what's going to happen here. I don't know if this is going to be a groundswell because a lot of the players have backed what Collier has said, saying Queen Fee, short for Napheesa. A bunch of them have applauded the courage of Collier to come out against the commissioner. So, right, you can get on Collier all you want, but you know what? If there's smoke, there's fire. And if this meant calling out the commissioner, which I understand could be a bit undermining, but we all know the WNBA's growth and what it's got to this point, and it's only going to grow and get better, that maybe this was the time for them to say, hey, we deserve more. And you know what? What can you say? Because I'm sure if there was an NFL player, mind you, I get it, it's not going to be a player that's making a ton of money because they're fat cats. The rank and file are not going to come out against the NBA. They're not going to come out against Major League Baseball. They're not going to come out against the National Hockey League. It's not going to happen. Again, Connor McDavid, you think he's going to say anything bad about Gary Bettman? Absolutely not. Unless they're not going to get a part of the pie. And obviously, I wasn't part of the negotiating between the WNBA and the owners, etc. But if Engelbert is on her high horse thinking that I'm in control and I have built these last few years with the media rights and the growth of the league, etc., and the ego's gotten in the way, then shame on her. She shouldn't have done that. Because now this could actually blow up in her face to the point where Collier and a lot of the players are back behind her to the point where, who knows, the owners may have no choice but to force her out. And you know what? If that's the case, so be it. I'm not going to be one to be, oh, well, no, that's wrong for Collier to do that, so on and so forth. All right, maybe there is a little bit of that. But you know what? If Engelbert had to be called out to the carpet based on her arrogance and her ego getting in the way, then you got to get her out. We've seen that with Roger Goodell. And I understand Roger Goodell, I've called him the American gangster. Going back to the 20 teens with the Ray Rice situation, with the concussions, with him going to the NFL draft and egging on the crowd. Come on, this is all you got? I mean, seriously, Roger Goodell? But I could do that as someone who talks sports. Nobody in the NFL that has even the most powerful guy, whether you're Patrick Mahomes, whether you're Lamar Jackson, a two-time MVP, no matter what, they're not going to speak against the institution or the shield. They know better than that. Where Collier, she's like, hey, I'm going to roll the dice. I'm going to speak my mind. And I'm going to put this out there that this is what's going on. And you know what? Kudos to her. If it means trying to get somebody that is just either thinking about themselves or putting themselves in front of the league or them even bigger than the league, then that's not a leader. That's not someone that you want the commissioner of your league, and the owners, I would think they'd feel the same way, despite the fact I'm sure there are a lot of owners that obviously feel, oh, well, I got one of these teams, whether it doesn't matter what sport, but they want to show off their shiny new toy. Yeah, I own a team, and you don't. Well, maybe they got to go back to the drawing board to get Engelbert out and somebody else in. Is that going to happen? Obviously, we'll have to wait and see. If it doesn't, I'm sure there's going to be even more of a groundswell to see whether or not Engelbert deserves to be out in the street, or if the owners are going to stand pat and say, no, she's going to stay there. Ooh, who knows? It could be a lot of friction and a lot of highly contested discussions moving forward on whether or not she stays or goes. But based on what I've seen and what I've read and heard, based on what Engelbert's behavior and how the players may be getting shortchanged here, although they agreed, but it may be time for Engelbert to get shown the door. And then one last thing, NBA-wise, I know you had Jonathan Kuminga sign with the Warriors after what seemed to be an ongoing saga. And for Kuminga, who's a good young player, for whatever the reason, was stuck to the end of the bench there in Golden State until Jimmy Butler got hurt in the playoffs and then he actually played. Put up decent numbers, but I get it. The numbers are invisible considering that the Warriors didn't do anything in Butler's absence, despite Kuminga actually, I don't want to go as far as saying heroic, but he actually showed his ability. He's still young. He's 22 years of age. And a guy that I believe his upside is rather high. I'm sure Golden State feels that way, but between the representation for Kuminga and wanting a 3-year deal and a no-trade clause and all this other nonsense to where the front office was saying, no, we're going to give him 2 years or we'll give him an opt-out or whatever. So they gave him a 2-year, $48.5 million deal, which, all right, pretty good. But based on what I've read here is that there is a possibility, because he signed his contract and he has until the middle of January before any deals could be made, I would not be surprised that if Kuminga's going to get some burn here from the start of the season, which is now what? 2 weeks from this coming Tuesday? It could be a scenario where Kuminga could be packaged and sent elsewhere, especially if Golden State gets off to a rather sluggish start. Because this is a team, and you would think Kuminga would be a big part of this team because they need some youth. They just signed Al Horford to a 2-year deal just a couple of days ago. It was official, and Horford's going to be 40 years old. To go with Steph Curry, 37, to go with Draymond Green, he's got to be somewhere 35, 36. Jimmy Butler's 36. I mean, what are we doing? Is there going to be an old folks home there out by the Bay Area? You got to keep some youth there, and I think Kuminga would be a good guy to keep along, especially once the Curry, Green era, those two in particular, once they're retired and their numbers get raised to the rafters. I mean, what are you going to do here? But there could be a situation where they may ship Kuminga. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but based on the friction between the two parties, and with Kuminga, I'm sure wanting to get more playing time, and maybe quite possibly that a transaction could take place there in the middle part of the season after January, and with the deadline there right before the All-Star break, who knows? Unless Kuminga's going to play lights out and they have no choice but to keep him there and maybe mend fences with the front office and the player, who knows? And I'm sure Media Day, he wasn't around for Media Day because I'm sure they would want to try to get some reaction from him on whether or not he's going to be comfortable there, whether or not he feels like, yeah, I want to be a part of this team, or he's going to be like, yeah, I'm here for now, but who knows what's going to happen down the road. Something to keep an eye on. I know Jonathan Kuminga is not moving the needle as far as the top 10 player in the sport, but you got to admit, Golden State, an older team, and with a young player like that with a lot of potential, why the disconnect? Why has this saga drawn out from the summer up until yesterday? Something to keep in mind here as the NBA season inches closer and we have preseason games on deck. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode just about in the books. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, and review. As I mentioned, YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. Little engine that could. Slowly but surely getting there. Right now I'm at Hank Aaron. When he broke Babe Ruth's record, I'm at 715. Trying to get to 1,000 people. So slowly but surely getting there. But please take a screenshot. Send it to me on socials. Apple, Spotify, JAYREELZ.com, where you can get the podcast. Social media on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, or Instagram at JAYREELZ. Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just a number. If you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following aforementioned social media accounts or the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA since birth. And if you couldn't hear the passion now, I don't know. You're going to have to come back on Monday or come back to a podcast pregame, which I did not do this morning on my YouTube channel. I'm going to do a podcast postgame once this is up on the aforementioned podcast platforms, the YouTube channel, etc. I'll do a podcast pregame, so you definitely want to check that out, because talking sports is what I do. Talking sports is what I love. Again, nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the Water League. Diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ podcast, on the flip, baby.